You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Greg Steinmetz. He is the author of American Rascal: How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune. Mr. Steinmetz is a journalist. He's an author. He's a graduate of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. We have several of those here in Indianapolis, including the late, great Amos Brown. We really can thank you enough for coming on the podcast. It's an honor to talk to you.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I mentioned to you a little bit before we got started, reading your book, it is an overlooked period of American history for sure. So much was happening in Europe during this period, the late 19th century, unification of Germany, how they kind of split into different camps. But when I was reading your book, I was chuckling to myself that it was like being in econ class again. And the two classes I took in college, I did very poorly. So please help me understand a few things with regard to this era. What does it mean to short stock? And why was that a mechanism by which people could make money?
Well, shorting stock is simple in concept. You make money not from the price of the stock going up, but from it going down. Problem with that is it's a little like baseball, where you hit a home run and the field is infinite in length. And it's the same with shorting a stock. If you think a stock's going to fall from $100 to 50, you make $50. But if the stock goes to 1,000, you lose 900. What if it goes to 2,000? What if it goes to 4,000? It can just keep going and going and going. And a lot of people who engage in short selling don't appreciate that. And we saw that come home last year to bite a prominent hedge fund with these meme stocks where people were shorting, GameStop, right? The hedge funds were shorting GameStop, and all these retail investors decided, they're vulnerable here because they've shorted so much of it. If we buy enough of that stock, we can create what's called a short squeeze, where they have to pay us whatever we demand almost to close that position and save themselves from ruin. So again, in a nutshell, it's just making money from a stock going down in price instead of up.
And was that legal during this time period, the late 19th century?
It's legal now, and it was legal then. But then again, everything was legal then. Today, insider trading is illegal. Then it was legal. Pump and dump schemes where you talk up the prospects of a company to make the stock go up at the same time that you're selling it, just to create buyer interest. You can't do that now. Back then you could. If you were CEO of a company, you could have a company on the side who did the printing business, who supplied the steel, who provided all your services, where you would get all that money. It was a way of siphoning off money from your company. You could do that now, but you would have to disclose it. and no one's going to invest in a company that is only in business of enriching the CEO. But back then, it was legal.
You anticipated my question to a certain degree, but let's chat a little bit more expansively. Describe this era. It's post-American Civil War, yet before the Spanish-American War in late 1890s. What was happening in the United States in general, and how did Wall Street and the investor/business community interact with clearly was kind of a post-Civil War boom?
Yeah. The biggest thing that happened in that period, I think, was just the transition from a rural agrarian society to an industrial society. And it was brand new, and politicians and the academics and all the other people who shaped and formed opinion, they just didn't know what to do about it. So I mentioned there was no regulation. That's because when you just had a country of farmers, you didn't need to have what was an elaborate regulatory apparatus to protect people from being destroyed by charlatans. But what happened after the war was, with industrialization, you also had the development of the railroads to make it more efficient and cheaper to get stuff from places like Indiana to the East Coast. What the railroads meant for financial markets was you had to raise a lot of money. You and your friends couldn't get together, pool your capital, and build a textile factory because you wouldn't have enough money to do that. You needed tons of money. That created the need for a financial market like Wall Street, where you could raise lots of money from the public. And that opened the door for people who saw the opportunity to cheat people by promoting schemes that were fraudulent, that were going nowhere. But you could talk up the prospects of something, sell it, make a lot of money, just like we see now with what happened with crypto. And Gould was very early in recognizing these possibilities, and he exploited it to its fullest extent and made a ton of money.
Called your book American Rascal. That seems to be, I wouldn't say a compliment. Did you mean it as a compliment? And what do you think Jay Gould would have thought of your title?
Well, Gould was a complicated character. He was unquestionably a crook. He would bribe judges. He would bribe politicians. He would do whatever it took to make money. I like to say, of all the robber barons, meaning Carnegie, Rockefeller, those types, that he was the biggest robber of all of them. Mark Twain said that Gould was the mightiest disaster to ever befall the country because he created a model for other people who wanted to get rich at all costs. He showed them the roadmap of what to do. So on the one hand, he was a crook, but on the other hand, there are a lot of things to admire about him. He worked like a dog. He was the smartest guy in the room. He knew the law better than his lawyers. He knew accounting better than his accountants. He wasn't necessarily trying to cheat widows and orphans as much as he was trying to get the best of other Wall Street types who were trying to do to him the same thing that he was doing to them. He was just better at it. Thomas Edison, with whom he mentioned all the people he had encounters with, Edison thought, okay, this guy's a crook, but he is really good at it, and he's really passionate about what he's doing. And so it's hard for me to hate this guy just because he is so gifted on different levels. So would Gould like the title? No, but it's pretty mild compared to what other people called him. Like I mentioned, what Mark Twain called him. New York Times likened him to Satan. Other people, any synonym you could think of for criminal and crook, they would call him. So Rascal's letting him off mildly.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We are talking with author and journalist Greg Steinmetz. We are discussing his book, American Rascal, How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune. So what exactly did he do You mentioned bribing and all that stuff, and okay, I'm not giving him a pass on that, obviously, and neither do you in your book. But from a financial or financial market standpoint, what did Gould do that was so nefarious that caused him to be the target of all this opprobrium?
Well, he burst onto the scene in 1868 when he stole the Erie Railroad from Commodore Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt had the New York Central, Gould, and he wanted to have the Erie so he could have a monopoly across New York State, which was very important because grain came in over the Great Lakes, landed in Buffalo, went on trains, and got shipped to New York. If Vanderbilt had a monopoly on that route, he could make a lot of money. There were some others who were in charge of the Erie at the time. Gould inserted himself in the middle of that by buying up enough votes to get himself elected to the board. And through hook or by crook, he managed to steal the thing from Vanderbilt. And the way he did it was by bribing judges and by getting the New York legislature to change the rules. Some of the fine print around takeover rules in New York at the time, he bribed the lawmakers to change it in a way that was more favorable to him. And after a while, Vanderbilt just got sick of fighting him and said, okay, Gould, you win, but there's really not much value left in the Erie because you've done your best to loot it when you were taking all this money to bribe people. So, okay, I'll walk away from this. But all this was exposed and put Gould on the map as being a very sharp-elbowed criminal figure. But the thing that really was his claim to fame was Black Friday, September 24th, 1869, when he blew up the gold market in a bid to corner gold, meaning buying as much gold as you possibly could, so much so that people would have to come begging for him if they needed gold to settle a transaction. He needed gold to do overseas deals. And the way, what he did here, first person, it was just bribery all the way up and down the ladder. The government controlled the price of gold because the government sat on a lot of gold. If it wanted to drive the price down for either political reasons or commercial reasons, it could just sell some gold into the market. Gould bought a bunch of gold on the assumption he could either bribe the government into letting the price run, or he could convince the government to let the price run. He gets involved with a son-in-law of, or rather a brother-in-law of President Grant. He bribes him so that he gets an audience with Grant. He tries to bribe Grant, but Grant's incorruptible, so he wasn't overt about it. Then he bribes an assistant secretary of the treasurer to give him information on what the government was going to do with gold. Then he bribes one of his best friends to do some things to promote the price and take the fall. Then he bribes Boss Tweed, the boss who ran New York City, to bribe a bunch of judges to get Gould's friend off the hook for taking the fall. And it's just corruption all the way up and down the line. And when the gold market blew up, it looked as if it was the end of Gould, but because no one was able to fight Gould on this level of corruption, Gould was able to walk away, and so was his co-conspirator in the scheme. And that's what made Gould famous and made him hated during his day.
Would he have thought it corrupt, or just this is the way we do business? And if I don't bribe Judge Smith, then someone else is going to bribe Judge Smith. Yeah. I mean, in your book, it's like, I forget the exact name, but Vanderbilt had a judge, and then that judge was no longer Vanderbilt's judge. And you have a quote that says, before you hire a lawyer, hire a judge, which made me laugh out loud. Was that just the way things were done, and Gould was perhaps just better at it?
He would say, yeah, it's corruption. He would say, it's bad. I don't like this, but it was how the game was played. Unfortunately, Grant goes down in history as a great general, but a horrible president, not because of his decision-making, but because of who he surrounded himself by and all the corruption scandals that broke during his presidency. I don't know if it was the most corrupt time in American history, but it was the first time that there was so much money sloshing around that the amounts that were paid in bribes were just enormous. Mark Twain wrote a book called The Gilded Age. That's where that term comes from. It's all about different senators and others being bribed. It was an open secret. Now you have to be smarter about how you do it. But back then it was almost above board. The only way in New York State you could convict someone for bribery was if there was a third party who actually saw the money change hands. So if I bribed you, we're in a room just by ourselves. One of us later confesses that money changed hands. That wouldn't hold up. The New York legislature designed the law to make it almost impossible to prove bribery.
What do you think Alexander Hamilton would have thought of this time period?
Well, Hamilton was...
or Gould himself, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I don't think he would care much for Gould, but he might say, well, I sort of brought this on because Hamilton was a champion of big business. He was a champion of businesses that cross state lines. He was a champion of the national bank and all these things that sort of came into being following the Civil War. I think Hamilton would have approved of. And Gould, he might have dismissed as just, a rotten apple, but was just a unfortunate byproduct of a system that ultimately brings more good than bad. But as things progressed and things got worse and worse and the corruption elevated, I'm sure Hamilton would have not been happy. Might have challenged him to a duel. I don't know.
And Gould was what, 5'2"?
Yeah, 5'3". He was just short enough to, he didn't have to buy his way out of the draft. He was short enough so he didn't qualify for military service.
Is there irony in your mind how he acted in his professional life, Jay Gould, as opposed to how he acted in his personal life and his marriage?
I don't know if irony is the right word, but and might be part of the same impulse. I think one reason Gould wanted to be really rich, besides the fact that he enjoyed making money, it was something that he just did for fun. He wanted to protect his family. He grew up in very poor circumstances. His dad was a dairy farmer in upstate New York. His mom died when he was very young. The father was an alcoholic. He had 6 older sisters, and they were really struggling. Gould's father couldn't even hire a helper. He had to do everything himself. And Gould wanted to save his own family from a similar fate. That's one of the things that motivated him. There's a show on HBO now called The Gilded Age, which is sort of a schmaltzy soap opera. But the narrative tension in that comes from the effort of the leading family here to, who is a nouveau riche robber baron family, to break into New York society and get invited to the balls of the Astors. You have a very cunning, ruthless businessman as the leading man in this story, the patriarch of the family, who is also a very loving and devoted family man. And that character is based not on Rockefeller or Carnegie, but on Jay Gould. So the producers of that show recognized the duality in Gould and saw that as an opportunity to create a drama.
But he was married for a long time.
Yeah.
Decades. He had, I think, is it 5 children? 6?
He had 6.
6 children. He doted on them. He appeared to be someone who always wanted the best for them and fought for them. And obviously through his business connections he was also, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned this, he was a non-drinker, never drank, thought it was evil or unholy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But do you think that let me ask this a different way. How do you think he reconciled in his mind his somewhat, Dr. Jekyll, tender, personal life and personal decisions and family life with the Mr. Hyde ruthlessness of how he conducted business, especially against people he knew or people he didn't know. It didn't matter. He was ruthless regardless.
Yeah. First on the temperance question, his dad was an alcoholic. That's easy to explain. So he was a teetotaler. I think, like a lot of crooks, he rationalized it in his own mind somehow. And the way I think he did it was by saying, if I don't get them, they're going to get me. So the people who were his victims were other fat cats on Wall Street who were engaging in similar tactics. The way he got, the way he got the Western Union from Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt owned it, then his son took over. He did that by, what did he do? He created the rival telegraph company, originally with the help of Edison, and then by doing some other things. Once he owned a bunch of railroads, that gave him control over a lot of Western Union's customers. He cut out Western Union and began using his own telegraph lines. That drove down the price of Western Union stocks. That wasn't criminal, but it was bare-knuckled, very nasty fight, and he was able to acquire Western Union for a cheap stock price. There he wasn't trying to deprive widows and orphans of anything. He was trying to deprive the individual who at the time was the richest person in the country. And a lot of his most nefarious acts took place when he was starting out. He was young, ambitious, maybe got some bad influence or bad advice from some of his friends. And again, if everyone else is committing bribery, what are you supposed to do if you want to compete at the highest levels?
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is Greg Steinmetz, author of American Rascal, How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune. If there's one sort of theme besides bribery, greed, malfeasance that runs through your book, and it was very interesting to me because you were so far removed from it, and that is the presence and the importance and the catalytic nature of railroads. Talk to us, please, a little bit about why and how railroads drove the economy, no pun intended, and at the same time, why they were so coveted by people like Jay Gould.
Yeah, well, railroads are what brought the country together. And during the war, the fact that the U.S. had 3 to 4 times the railroad stock and tracks that the South had was decisive. The best agricultural land, as we know, isn't on the East Coast where the people live, but in the Midwest, in places like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. The best land for grazing cattle. And let's see. So what the railroads could do was provide an economical way to bring this stuff to market. Before the railroads came along, you had to pull things by horse, right? Or ship them by barge as far as you could, and then you pull them by horse. The railroads made it a lot cheaper. And you also had people from the East Coast trying to improve their lots by moving west, setting themselves up as farmers, and they needed a way to bring the stuff to market. So as in our economy today, transportation infrastructure is vital to make the economy move. It was the same back then. And the railroads, as mentioned, it just cost a lot to build. The Union Pacific was built largely with federal subsidies. There just wasn't money in private hands to take on these massive projects. So if you look at the trading volume in the New York Stock Exchange in those days, most of it was railroad stocks and bonds, because that was the one industry where you needed to come up with massive amounts of money.
Years later, the United States was described by British Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey as, quote, a gigantic boiler. There's no limit to how much heat it can produce once lit. Is this the beginning of the American industrial age, in the sense that we started to feel our oats, pound our chest, and brings out people like Theodore Roosevelt? The Industrial Revolution started in Britain, but we took it to another level in this time period. And did it produce men like Gould, or did Gould and men like him push the Industrial Revolution?
Well, I guess they're part and parcel of the same. But the U.S. at the time, coming out of the Civil War, the U.S. was not the leader of the free world, was not the leader in economic output. There was concern that we were still regarded by Europe as a sort of a banana republic. Europe was very concerned that the U.S. was going to be able to pay back its war debt. Most of, or a lot of the money that came to build the railroads wasn't supplied by Americans. It was supplied by British and German, Dutch, French investors. They saw the U.S. as an emerging market. They wanted to be part of it. And as often happens when you're investing in emerging markets, you either hit it big or you lose everything. So those who invested in the New York Central with Vanderbilt did very good. Those who invested in the Erie with Gould did very poorly. Not that Gould did poorly, but his investors did. So we were getting to the point where the cauldron, as you described, was being lit, but it wasn't yet fully cooked. That would come, during World War I. We really proved ourselves.
Your book has an amazing cast of characters. Let's go through some of them, please, a little bit, and maybe talk about their relationship with Gould and his with them. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, of someone everyone has heard of. Was he the richest man in the United States during this time? And how did he react to this young upstart, Jay Gould?
He was the richest man at the time. And he initially thought Gould was just some other young punk on Wall Street. Then he came to realize Gould was just played at a higher level. And he absolutely hated Gould by the end, because Gould outsmarted him not once, but twice, but several times. When asked by a reporter in Syracuse one day who he thought was the best businessman out there, he said the smartest business person in the country is Jay Gould. And Rockefeller said the same thing. There's a story where Gould at the Erie Railroad and Vanderbilt had the New York Central, when Vanderbilt tried to destroy Gould in the price war. Let's say it cost $100 to ship something, a full boxcar full of cows from the Midwest, for instance. If the price was $100, once the price war started, it went down to $75, $50. Ultimately, Vanderbilt said, okay, to destroy Gould, I'm going to take it down all the way to $1. What Gould did was, all right, I can't stay in business with freight at $1, but what I can do is I can buy up a bunch of cows in Chicago and put them on Vanderbilt's cars, ship them to New York for free, and all that money that it was paying for shipping is now going to be my profit. And he made a ton of money. And when Vanderbilt found out, he was having steam coming out of his ears. He was so upset. And every chance Gould got to tweak Vanderbilt, he did.
The next person I want to ask you about was Ulysses S. Grant, who was president from 1869 to 1877. You mentioned, obviously, the victorious general for the North during the American Civil War. Was President Grant just ill-equipped, in your mind, to handle everything that was going on in the financial markets. He was either too naive, too distracted, too trusting, whatever word you want to use, because his presidency has been tarred by all the terrible financial dramas that took place during his 8 years. Was it just the wrong man at the wrong time?
Yeah, Grant's downfall was that he was too trusting, and what happened with Gould and him was Grant had a sister who was single at the time Grant was elected president, and a well-connected but crooked lobbyist got to know her and saw, I suppose he loved her, but he also saw the advantage of having, being in the president's family. So he married her, got very close to Grant. Grant relied on him for insight into how Washington worked without realizing that this guy was completely corrupt. And he thought, this is what he must have thought. He thought, this guy's my brother-in-law. You don't betray family. And yet he was betrayed. So yeah, it gets back to this point of him being trustworthy and ultimately seeing, probably having a sunnier outlook on humanity, despite what happened in the Civil War, than maybe a president should.
Mark Twain is probably, maybe more than probably, the foremost commentator on American life during this time period. He just had no use for people like Gould. How did Twain satirize him?
Well, Twain, yeah. Did Twain satirize him? He satirized the age,
right?
And he drew inspiration from Gould's chicanery. There was I wouldn't say a British version of Mark Twain, but a novelist named Anthony Trollope, who took direct inspiration from Gould, where he talks about a banker who dupes a bunch of British investors into buying a railroad in the country and then takes them down. So yeah, Gould did serve as the inspiration for some literary figures. Like I said, Twain called Gould the mightiest disaster to ever befall this country. And Twain, it's interesting. He was very friendly with was it one of Rockefeller's top aides, a guy who was corrupt in his own right, but who gave good financial advice to Twain, who's otherwise a very poor businessman on his own. So if you became friendly with Twain, he would give you a break, but if he didn't know you, he would beat you up mercilessly, and that's what happened with him and Gould.
Would you call J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller Gould's contemporaries, or did they come after him by a few years and learned from Gould himself?
No,
either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, no, they were contemporaries. Let's see, Gould was born in 1836. Carnegie was born in 1835. Right. Vanderbilt was a generation older. Rockefeller made a lot of. He became really rich after automobiles caught hold and people need a lot of gas. In Gould's day, he wasn't yet the richest person. And if Gould had kept going, Gould died young. He was 56. Rockefeller lived until he was 93. If Gould had kept going and lived to 93, there's a good chance he would have had more money than Rockefeller. And there were those, the social critic Henry George among them, who thought that if Gould wasn't the richest person when he died, he was on his way to becoming the richest. One thing I want to mention, and we've touched on it a little bit, what was really interesting to me was how this was the same time that Jesse James was out west robbing banks and sticking up trains in Missouri. the Wild West was alive and well out west, but it was the same thing was going on in Wall Street. Gould, but why I enjoyed writing the book so much and what made it easy to write was that there was so much action. There's a scene where Gould is has to fight back with guns to recover one of his factories. He's in the middle of a gunfight. There's a kidnapping. Gould's best friend is murdered. Another one gets a bomb thrown at him by an anarchist. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on there, which in our sanitized world of Wall Street, where like right now we're not talking face to face. Everything then, it was person to person, live interaction, and vigilante justice was still in play even in New York City. So I just wanted to point that out. That Wild West comparison, I think, is useful in understanding the Gould story.
The Wild East, perhaps,
yeah,
for lack of a better term.
What it was.
I read a book in college. It's called The Myth of the Robber Barons. I think it was by a named Bert Folsom, American history professor. What is the myth in your mind? You don't have to speak to this book, obviously. What is the myth of the robber barons? And if you had to defend them, if your next book is, American non-rascals, the robber barons of the 19th century, how would you defend them and their actions?
Okay. In answering the first question, what a robber baron was, back in medieval Germany, my first book was about a Renaissance banker named Jacob Fugger, who is from the same age of Christopher Columbus and Da Vinci. Those were when the real robber barons were on the scene. They would be impoverished knights, barons, whatever they were, who would literally stand on their property line and just rob anyone who tried to cross. And is that a useful metaphor for what the robber barons in the Gilded Age were doing? And I think it is, because to the extent that what they did amounted to everyone in the whole country paying more money for goods and services, it was similar to that sort of coercive extraction that the robber barons 500 years ago were doing. But in their defense, well, let's see. In Gould's defense, he built more miles of railroad track than anyone. And if you believe that railroads are what pulled the country together and built the country, then Gould did as much as anyone to make that happen. He employed a lot of people. He wasn't paying them top dollar. He would do what he can to pay them as little as possible, but he did create a lot of jobs and made it possible for people to take care of themselves and feed their families. So by unleashing this entrepreneurial energy, it found expression in the robber barons, and it wasn't always pretty, but it did build the country and create the fruits we now enjoy. So that would be my defense.
One of the things that comes out, we have a few more minutes with Greg Steinmetz, author and journalist. He wrote American Rascal, How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune. Towards the end of your book, when Rockefeller and Carnegie and others are starting to really become more prominent, there's a little bit of a discussion that I found interesting about the nature and the importance of philanthropy, and how a lot of the other industrialists and extremely wealthy Americans deemed it proper to give away their money. Why did they do that? You think, why do you think that mindset took place? And what was Gould's attitude toward it?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of reasons you can do a couple of things with your money if you're really rich. One is you can just give it to your kids, or you can just give it all away. Warren Buffett has a thing called the giving pledge, where you pledge to give half of all your money, at least half of all your money when you die, to philanthropy. Ted Turner and some others, Bill Gates, have agreed to this. Buffett certainly has. That wasn't Buffett's idea. It was Carnegie's idea. Carnegie didn't like the idea of family wealth perpetuating itself. I think he was also looking to, do good works. Whether it was to save his soul or not, that does enter into the thinking of some people who give it all away. Maybe he felt guilty about how he got it, so he gave it away. Gould, I would say that Gould didn't feel that way, because that's not what Gould did with his money. When he died, it passed to his children. It was divided equally between all of them. When Vanderbilt died, he gave it all to his children, but he gave 95% of it to his oldest son because he wanted to keep the corpus of his empire intact. That was another way of doing it. But I think Gould might have given more money away had he lived longer, but he did. If you look at when, the reason people remember Vanderbilt, the reason they remember Carnegie and Rockefeller is because they put their names on things. Down the street from my office here in New York, we got Carnegie Hall. You go down the other direction, we have Rockefeller Center. Rockefeller Center, they broke ground on that when John D. was still alive. And then, of course, you got Vanderbilt University, which if you watch SEC football games, you see them Vanderbilt scroll across your screen every Saturday afternoon during football season. Gould didn't do that because he died when he was 56 years old. These other guys didn't do any of this stuff until they were in their 70s. So had Gould lived longer, I think there would have been, he might have taken such an action. New York University was negotiating with him for a large gift. And maybe New York University would now be called Gould University had he not died so young.
Gould had many close calls in his empire days, and he used various methods and demonstrations of intelligence to get through these scrapes. But in his last one, which you describe in your book, all I could think of is Jay Gould's empire the first example of too big to fail?
The episode you describe was, there was a time when Gould was over leveraged, meaning he had more debt than what was prudent. And even though he owned stock in a lot of different companies, if the value of that stock fell too much, he wouldn't have enough money to pay off the debt. And he was caught in that situation at one moment. So he confronted his creditors and said, well, you can either give me a pass here and we can renegotiate the debts, or I'm going to declare bankruptcy. And he pulled a document out of his pocket saying, okay, here's my bankruptcy petition. I've already signed it. I'm going to walk this over to the courthouse and declare bankruptcy. But as you know, if I do that, the whole market's going to fall out of bed. That they're going to see just a wave of selling of all my stocks, and that's going to create panic among everyone. So whatever you have invested in the market is going to get trashed too. So take your pick. If you really want to destroy me, go ahead, but you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot too. So yes, I would say you're correct in saying that he was too big to fail, or at least he got people to believe that he was. And in those days, you certainly didn't have any government intervention to protect the markets from such things.
We describe in your book the collapse of the firm Grant and Ward, and how that triggered all sorts of adverse economic and financial conditions. But I would imagine that would have been just a blip on the screen compared to Gould's failing if he had done so.
Yeah, that's probably right. Because the Grant and Ward story is just a horrible story. There you had Grant's son becoming a business partner with a crook, and Grant's son going to President Grant and saying, "Hey, do you want to bank this business for me?" So the crook was able to use the name of Grant to raise even more money, which he then tried to pocket for himself, and then the whole scheme blew up, and it was you couldn't imagine anything more embarrassing for Grant. In Gould's case, yeah, so the market, there was a shudder after that one. but Gould was a giant at the time that had he gone under. In 1873, you had the then most influential man on Wall Street, a guy named Jay Cooke. He was influential because he was the one who raised the money for the Union to fight the Civil War. His banking house was the Goldman Sachs of its day. He went bankrupt because of a failed railroad scheme. And his bankruptcy caused a panic on Wall Street. A lot of people got wiped out. That caused what was called the Long Depression, which lasted from 1873 to 1879, 6 years. It was the deepest depression that the country ever had until the Great Depression. And that was brought about by the failure of one individual. So Gould could have caused the same thing had things gone the other way.
Last question before we get to the 5 questions we ask all of our guests. On his deathbed, he died of, I don't know, he died of tuberculosis, but for some reason I find the term consumption just more enthralling for whatever reason. Anyway, that's how he died. On his deathbed, would you say that, in your opinion, Jay Gould was full of more pride for what he had accomplished and left for his family, or full of more remorse for how he accomplished it and how he treated others?
There is no evidence that he felt any remorse, nor do I. He might have been proud, but I think he was anxious when he died, that he didn't do enough to lay the groundwork for his children. He would have liked to have more time to work with them so that they could make wiser financial decisions. The only one he really worked closely with was his oldest son, although that didn't work very well. He turned out to be not such a great businessman. So I think that's what was going on in Gould's head when he died with that. I'm still worried about my family, and I wish I had done more to make sure that they wouldn't suffer any hardship.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Greg Steinmetz, are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
First question. What was your first job?
My first job out of high school was writing advertising copy for a department store in Cleveland, Higbee's. Higbee's is its claim to fame is they're the department store in the movie The Christmas Story. And I would write ads for them, and everyone had to say, save $5, save $10. It was all about just reminding people that this item was on sale today. Wasn't a lot of creativity, so I got out of that one.
Second question. What was your first concert?
I saw Todd Rundgren, Ted Nugent, and Fleetwood Mac at Cleveland Stadium in 1978, I believe.
It's not a bad triple bill.
It was good.
Ted Nugent's the only concert I've ever gone to where I finally just had to leave because it was too loud. Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
One of my favorite books is Confederacy of Dunces. Do you know that one? It's got to be about the funniest book that I've ever come across. It's about sort of a ne'er-do-well in New Orleans and his efforts to just get through the day. And then I just listened recently again. I read it a long time ago. That Confederacy of Dunces, by the way, was written by a guy named John Kennedy Toole, and he died without having published it. And his mom found the manuscript in his desk drawer and brought it to a publisher. It's an incredible story. I read a long time ago, Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. I listened to it again, and the audible version of this book with the voices they do, it just made that experience so much better. It's just a hilarious book. So those are 2 sort of humorous novels. I think the best book of nonfiction that is The Power Broker, Robert Moses, and all his Lyndon Johnson books.
Johnson comes off as not like an animal, but I can't think of another word for it.
Yeah.
For him.
Yeah.
Fourth question. If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happened, which event would you choose?
Oh, I thought it was multiple choice. I would like to see Jesus in action. So whether that be the Sermon of the Mount or any other of the great stories from the New Testament, I'd like to see what he was really like.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
Living today. Oh. I suppose someone really fun, like I don't know, Keith Richards, Bruce Springsteen, someone like that.
You make them sing for their supper?
Bono. Well, if that's part of the deal.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been Greg Steinmetz, author of American Rascal, How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune. It is a terrific read, even for someone like me who got poor grades in economics. Greg, really what he does, as much as detailing Gould's life, is he sets the broader picture, the theater of everything that was going on during this time period, not only really in American history, but also in European history. Thank you, Greg, very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Robert. It's fun.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.